and welcome on in, everybody. Good to see you. My name is Sam Peterson, and I'm here for a Photoshop challenge. And today's Photoshop challenge is action movie explosions. So we're kind of doing that classic scene of people walking away very nonchalantly from an explosion. It's going to be a very light, heavy effect, which seems to be a theme for me. A lot of lighting effects. But let me show you what we're working with right in Photoshop. So here's Photoshop. If you want to follow along with this challenge, make sure to download the starter file from the description below. This will give you everything that I'm working with, and you can just follow along step by step. And as always, you're welcome to kind of take this and run with it if you want to take it in a sort of different direction. So the effect that we're creating, this is the image that we're using, this is the starter file, but the effect that we're creating looks something a little like this. So kind of this big explosion with a lot of lighting effects happening as a result. You can kind of see the difference there. So what I want to do, well, first off, I want to say hey to everyone. What's going on, Sean? We have our mod Annika in the chat, RB, Marcia, General Kenobi. It's good to see all you. Susan, Carol, welcome on in, everybody. So there's a lot to do for today's challenge, so I'm going to get right into it. First off, what I want to do is duplicate the background. I have this background selected. I'm going to do Control or Command J, and we'll duplicate that. Now what I want to do with this duplicate is mask out the figures from the background. So I'm going to select something like my quick selection tool. That's my go-to, but I'm just going to use that so I can click select subject here at the top. You can also use the object selection tool. If you hold down on this tool set, you'll see the object selection tool. I would try both to see what gives you a better default selection, to see what out of the box looks a little bit better. I think the select subject is a bit better with this particular image, but I'd recommend trying both. We are going to have to do some cleanup, and you can do that by adding to your selection. I'm using the quick selection tool. I'm holding shift, and if I need to subtract, like that floor, I'll hold on Alt or Option. So this kind of uses some AI to sort of figure out where these edges are. I do a lot of the initial selection with something like select subject, and then I'll use tools like this to clean up after it. And then all the things that those can't get, like if the quick selection tool is struggling with any areas, I'll just do that manually with something like the lasso tool. So I kind of go like a 3-tiered approach there, from most automated to most manual. So if I'm having issues here, I'll use the lasso tool. Now, this particular image actually has a lot of cleanup to do. It takes quite a bit of time, and since there's so much to do, I'm just going to kind of show you how that works. We can click the mask button at the bottom of the layers panel, mask it out, and that's what we're working with. You can see the feet are cut out. So take as much time as you want to practice your masking, but if you really just want to practice the rest of the techniques in this challenge, I'd recommend just using select subject or the object selection tool, whatever gives you a better out-of-the-box selection, and just going with there depending on how much time you want to spend. So I'm actually going to delete that, and I have kind of a pre-masked one just for the sake of time. So again, spend as much time as you want for your own practice and your own purposes, but that's my mask that I spent a little bit time cleaning up with those tools that I mentioned. So what I want to do is I want to get into the explosion layers here. That's in the assets folder. I'm going to open that, and I'm just going to duplicate all these. I like having the raw assets in case I need them. So I'm going to do Control or Command J after selecting all of them. And we'll grab those and pull them out of the asset folder. Collapse my asset folder and hide it so it's not in my way, and we're good. So I'm going to I have 2 of these explosions with black backgrounds. I'm going to put those together, and then I'm going to hide all of them except for the dirt one. All right, so this is what we want to start with. We're going to mask out the explosions, and there's 3 different ways we're dealing with these stock images. 2 of them have backgrounds, and 2 of them have a black background. Those ones will be much easier. But for the ones that don't have black backgrounds, we can use something like the color range option. So if you go to select color range, what we can do here is use this default eyedropper to select the sky, because that's what we want to get rid of primarily. Now you can add to that selection with the little plus icon eyedropper. So I can select that red part of the sky that didn't quite get picked, this upper right hand corner where it's probably a bit darker, and I can see that the water is selected, so I'll just try selecting the blues in there, and you see it's actually selecting the darker parts of the where the sky and the particles blend together. And that's actually perfect because I don't want like a white halo around these little particles. So taking away these darker points is actually probably getting rid of that for me. Now you can see if you've gone too far, maybe that's too much. You can always undo it, but I'll leave that and I'll click OK. I think that should be pretty good. Now I can click mask. Oh, whoops. I have the wrong layer selected here. So let's do mask. And then I realized it masked out the wrong part. So I can do, I can flip that, invert it with Controller Command I. I'm selecting the mask. And we got a pretty good explosion here. So what I actually did wrong here was I want to scale this down. So I'm going to do this really quick. Scale this down a bit because we didn't get the edges. But I'm going to do the same thing really quickly. Select color range. Grab my main color. Grab all the remaining ones. Some of the watercolors. Looks pretty good. Select OK. Hit mask. Select my mask, Controller Command I. So from here, what I want to do is I want to mask out the ground as well. Let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and just mask out this bottom part the best I can. It doesn't need to be perfect. We're kind of using these a little roughly. But I think that looks good. And I want to convert to smart object. So this way I can scale it a little bit more freely. I don't have to worry so much about it being perfect. So I might want to put this right, I'm imagining where like the horizon line is or where the explosion might be taking place from. So I might put it right around here, scale it down. I think I want the top of that kind of showing off a little bit. So I think that looks kind of good. We can always mask this after the fact. I'll create a mask here and just kind of like ease off the bottom if I need to. But we'll leave that as it is. That's pretty good. I'm going to Controller Command J, duplicate that, and I'm just going to move it over a bit. I just want to kind of duplicate this effect a little bit. So I might scale this up. Put that in position, press OK. And from here, I can mask any like hard edges that we have. A lot of this is going to be covered, but I still do want to blend this the best I can. I might fade this edge off to the right a little bit more. If you don't like any edges, you can fade them. Kind of makes this less uniform too if we fade it a bit. Might fade this one. So you can mask it after the fact and kind of see what looks good. Let's move on to the other ones so we can position them all together. But we got this fiery explosion one, so we'll do the same thing. We'll go into Select, Color Range, grab the sky, grab the additional eyedropper, and I want to grab these dark buildings in the background. I don't want that color showing through. We got a little bit of sky here. I could try that. If I don't like it, I could always do Control Z. But I think that looks good. I'll select that. I'll do OK. And I'll mask that. And same thing, go to my mask, do Controller Command I to invert. You'd also do Controller Command Shift I to invert the selection before you mask it. Either way works. So from here, what I want to do is I want to make this a smart object. Right click, convert to smart object. That way I can scale it to my heart's content. And I'll just position this however I see fit. I think I'll put this one on the right side. I think that looks pretty good. Right around there, press enter. And I want to create a mask for this as well, the bottom of the layers panel. And just mask out those hard edges that we get from the border of the image. I could even just hold on shift, and I'm using a soft round brush, by the way. This is the default soft round brush. I use this airbrush all the time. But we could even put this around the bottom, hold on shift, and just drag. And that way you can kind of get this softened edge. So I might use a bigger brush to get a softer edge. But the shift lets you just scroll horizontally, which helps a lot. So again, we're just kind of positioning these pieces for now. We can always edit these further and see how it looks. So I want to go into the last explosion stock images, and I'm going to change these to screen. So since they have a black background, you'll see a lot of stock images, especially effects, have a black background. Screen often works really well to use this very easily. No masking required. So I'm just going to position this how I want. I might scale it up. And again, we can do right click, convert to smart object. Always a good idea if you want to scale things around and you don't know exactly how big you want them or how small you want them. You get a bit of flexibility. Press enter. I'll do the same thing for this one. Change the blending mode to screen layer and right click it, smart object, and move this into position and see what I like. Might scale this up a bit bigger. Kind of like the blast being in the middle here. That looks kind of neat. Scale it up even more. Press enter, and I could even duplicate that. Control or Command J. Duplicate it again, move it over here if we want. I don't like how we have a seam at the bottom from that original one that we masked out, that original explosion. So I could hover the bottom over here slightly. So it kind of breaks that up. But one thing I don't like is how these are duplicate shapes. It looks fake, it looks repeated. So we could always mask this one out and just change it enough so the shape isn't as visible. I think the figures will be blocking this bottom shape, which is visible. So let's put our figures at the top now and see how it all looks together. Now, to me, these two explosions that I duplicate, you can't really see the duplicating parts. We masked out one and the other is covered. So I think that actually looks kind of cool. So stack these as much as you want. If you see any of these seams, like I'm seeing a slight angle here. Let me turn these off so you can see it. See that hard edge? If you see any of those, go in and mask them up after the fact to clean up any hard edges. But that is looking pretty good, I think, for the most part. So let me see where we are. Yeah, so I want to add maybe a color lookup to this whole thing. I feel like the coloration of the background and the foreground doesn't really look good to me. The green of the leaves looks way too intense. It doesn't look warm enough. So let's try a new adjustment layer. Go into layer, new adjustment layer, color lookup. And you can scroll through these different color lookups to see if there's any effects that you really like. Like candlelight's kind of cool if we eased off the opacity. I think fall colors is kind of what I'm going for here. I think that looks pretty good. It may be a bit intense on the skin tone. You could always control click the figures and mask it out, but I think that looks pretty good for now. So we're going to leave that. Now what I want to do is add lighting onto the figures to make it fit this crazy lighting situation that's going on behind them. So what I'm going to do is select my figures. Actually, first I can select all my explosion layers. It's 6 of them, it looks like that I have. And I'm going to do Control or Command G, and we'll just call this explosions. I like to keep my layers grouped when there's too many of them. What's going on, Jack? Good to see you. Peter, welcome on in, everybody. If anyone's just coming in, glad to have you. So I'm going to go to my figures, and we're going to make a hue and saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to clip that to the figures here. And we're going to click colorize, crank the saturation up quite a bit. Maybe we'll go all the way up to like 90 or even 100. And then we're going to find a hue that we like that fits the color of the explosion. So for me, thinking this orangey color around 30, 32, that looks pretty good. Let's leave it there. And then what I want to do is I want to control click the figures layer, the little thumbnail there, which is going to select the contents of that layer, which is really useful. So I want to go to select, modify, and contract that selection. We can contract that selection about 15 pixels. That's going to bring it in just a bit. I think that looks pretty good for this image. And then what we want to do is feather the selection. So we'll go to the same thing, select, modify, but feather this time. And I'll do about 15 pixels as well. So we'll click that. And then we'll go over to the hue and saturation mask and do Alt backspace to fill in the layer with the selected color. Now we want to mask it out, so make sure you have black selected. But Alt or Option and backspace will fill that in. So if I do Control or Command D to deselect, we have this little rim light. Now this will be more apparent in a bit, but you can also change the opacity of this if it's a bit too much. We have it at 100. We could always take it down to like 80 or 75 or something like that. Take it down to 75. So now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to create a shadow within the figures. Because if you have, if you're taking a picture with a camera, it usually exposes for the lighting. So if you have a really bright scene and you're exposing for the lighting, a lot of the other areas are going to be darker. So I want to make the figures kind of dark in contrast to this really bright scene here. So I'm going to go and make a new layer with Control or Command, Shift N. It's the hotkey I always use for new layer. And we'll do a figure shadow is what I'll call it. And I'm going to make it a multiply layer. And let's see. What I want to do is I want to fill this in. I'm going to get my paint bucket tool here. I want to fill it in with like a mid-tone, desaturated red. I think maybe that would be good. I can try this. I'm going to right-click that and do clip to the figures. Yeah, something like that. Very desaturated mid-tone. You can see where my color is on the color picker. I don't want it too colorful or it might look a little weird, so it's like right next to gray. So what I want to do is same thing. Control click the figures here, and then we can contract the selection. So we go to Select, Modify, Contract. And we'll contract the selection, I think like 20 pixels this time. Click OK, and we want to feather it again. So we go to Select, Modify, Feather. And I think for this one, 15, we'll keep it 15 like we did for the previous one. Now for this, we can mask it. So we'll click the little mask button at the bottom of the layers panel. And now we have just a shadow in the middle here, which I think looks pretty good, but it's a little bit too heavy-handed. So I want to lower the opacity to whatever you think looks good. You can have very little, or you can have it pretty overt. But I think maybe around like 60, 50, 60, something like that looks good. I could even go in now and mask off the faces just a bit. If I want to draw attention to the faces and brighten them up just a bit, I'm just using a big, soft, round brush, airbrush, to paint black on the heads a little bit. So subtle, but you know, just a little tweak there. So what do I want to do from here? I want to create some of the remaining lighting effects. So we have most of them here. We got the rim light. We kind of got that shadow. I'll show you what those look like together. I think it just fits the scene a little bit better. What we might want to do is create a drop shadow. They're going to have this kind of intense lighting explosion behind them. So let's try adding a shadow in front of them. Peter asks, could you use harmonize and neural filters? Yeah, absolutely. That would actually be a really cool one to try. I'd give it a shot. I think you would have to flatten your background image with the explosion and the color lookup, and then use that as the reference when you're harmonizing the figure layer. Definitely try that. I might give it a try after this stream, but that could give you some really great results too. So what I want to do is I want to duplicate this figure layer with Control Command J to create this drop shadow. And I'm just going to control click this little toggle here, this handle, and we can free transform them this way. I'm just going to drag them down a bit. I'm not going to stretch them out too far, but then I'm going to move this into place. And I want to be careful here. We have 1 foot that's touching the ground, or that isn't touching the ground. So I want to move all these feet so they're touching. This is going to be the key foot here because she's stepping back. And I'll stretch it down as much as I want. I think that looks good. I'm going to press enter. I'm then going to lock the transparencies of this layer. And I'm going to fill this in with Alt and backspace for the selected color that I have. So maybe that mid-tone, kind of like blue or something. We'll try that. Alt, backspace. And now we'll turn that into a multiply layer. The blending mode will turn into multiply. And I could try, again, selecting new color, Alt, backspace, darkening it if I want. What I want to do here is I might just want to erase out the parts of the shadow that are hanging over. This doesn't need to be exact. I think that looks pretty good. Any pieces peeking out past the figures, I'll just erase. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click this and do convert to smart object. And we're going to go to filter, blur gallery, and we'll try an iris blur. And the reason I like the iris blur is because you can kind of control what parts are in focus. You can see as I move it, anything inside the line is in focus, anything outside gets blurred. And you can kind of tweak this by squeezing the edges, moving it around, and even controlling these inner parts which sort of control the gradation, how abrupt or how gradual the blur is. So I'm going to move this bottom one up here. If I want the feet in focus, I can move these little dots down past the foot, but I'm going to have it like right around the foot. I want it a little bit out of focus, but more in focus than the part further away. You can mess with the blur amount here. I think 15 looks okay. We could try it more, but maybe somewhere in like 15 or 20. I think could look pretty good. We could try like 22. Move that in. And I'm just going to click OK at the top. And that will be saved to our smart filters, so we can always edit that later if we want. But I think that looks okay. You can always go in after the fact, add a mask. And if you feel like this foot that's lifting up would be getting blown out by the light a bit more, you could mask that off. Mask off any parts you don't like. Or if you want to fade it out a bit. So lock transparencies is basically like a clipping mask. If you have, let's say we made a circle on one layer and you lock the transparencies, you'll only be able to input information onto that circle now. The pixels that are already filled in are the only ones that will be affected. So it works like a clipping mask without actually having to create a clipping mask. So from here, what do we want to do? We created the drop shadow. How much time we got? We can do a couple linear dodge lighting layers. I love doing manual lighting. It's a lot of fun to paint it in for me. So on top of the background, I'll do ground lighting. We'll call it that. Ground lighting LD for linear dodge. Why not? Select the linear dodge blending mode. And what I can do from here is select like a fairly dark, somewhat desaturated warm color. You can try it out with different colors. More saturated, that looks kind of cool. So you can see how dark, it's about mid saturation. And with a big airbrush, I'm just gonna paint maybe like a little bit of lighting at the bottom here. You can paint it anywhere really. You could paint it up on the explosion if you want to play with that. But I want kind of this ground lighting effect. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing with the figure layers. So Control or Command Shift N. We'll call this Figures Lighting LD for linear dodge, and select the linear dodge blending mode. Now I could go in here and just paint on top. It's basically like a light enveloping them sort of effect. We kind of got that with the hue and saturation, but we can go as much as we want with this. I could, paint over them. I could go insane and go really bright, but I'm just kind of painting like around in between their heads, like it's kind of leaking over them just a little bit. So I'll toggle that on and off. You can see it's kind of a subtle effect, but you can do as much or as little as you want. We could do it in between them a little bit. Toggle that on and off. Yeah, something like that. So it just gives you a little bit more control if you want to paint in some of the lighting. Lastly, we don't have too much time here, but we could create a little bit of a vignette. So let's do that. Do Control or Command Shift N for the new layer, and we'll do vignette. Do a multiply layer, and I'm just going to fill this in with like a mid-tone desaturated bluish purple, something like that. You can try different colors, see what looks good. And I think that works pretty well. So what I want to do is maybe just I'm going to do a quick and messy vignette here. There's a lot of ways to create a vignette, but I'll just create a little circle around our figures here that I want to highlight. Press delete. And then we'll take our vignette, and I suppose we could make this a smart object, why not? And that'll give us a little bit of flexibility. Do a Gaussian blur here, and we'll do something pretty big. You don't want to go too higher. It kind of gives you a weird effect, but like, yeah, 160, 170. We'll do like 180. And then what I can do here is I can ease off the opacity because it's a bit too much. It's a lot too much. I'll try like 40 or 35, somewhere around there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask this and mask out the top because we don't want a vignette on our explosion. The explosion's supposed to be super bright. So I'm just masking out the entire top area. So really it's not much of a vignette. I guess it's more of like a foreground darken to really make it look like it's brighter in the background and keep the focus on our subjects here. So that's about all the time I have for you for today. That is the effect that we got. I think we came a long way with this. There's a lot of techniques to play with. It's mostly lighting techniques. And again, spend as much time on the masking as you want. But definitely, if you do this challenge, post it in the Discord because I am I'm mentoring the Discord all this week. Probably going to be checking in these challenges after this week too, giving feedback. You can give feedback to other people. Everyone's creating really awesome work. And so great job on these, everybody. I'm looking forward to seeing more. There's a lot going on in this challenge, so just kind of take what you want from it, play around with the techniques, and have fun. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. I really do appreciate it, and I'll see y'all next time.